Picture this. It's July 15th, 1987. A Greyhound bus is driving through the Nevada desert on Highway 50. They call it the loneliest road in America. Inside, 18 passengers. Families, college students, a retired teacher, all heading west to California, dreaming of new beginnings. By nightfall, the bus was gone. Vanished. No wreckage. No bodies. No trace. Except for one man. He walked out of the desert 3 days later, sunburned and delirious. His clothes were torn. His feet were bleeding. And he kept whispering the same thing over and over. The sun blinked. The sun blinked. This is the story of the bus that vanished in the desert, and the mystery that still haunts Nevada today. Let's go back to the beginning. July 15th, 1987. Early morning at the Reno bus station. The air was already warm, promising another scorching summer day in the Nevada desert. The bus station was quiet, with only a handful of travelers waiting for their morning departures. The bus was scheduled to leave at 6 a.m. Route 50 through Nevada, then over to California. A 9-hour journey through one of the most desolate stretches of American highway. Highway 50 earned its nickname honestly. For over 400 miles, it cuts through the heart of Nevada's Great Basin Desert, passing through tiny towns separated by 70, 80, sometimes 100 miles of nothing but sand, rock, and sagebrush. The driver was Marcus Chun, 52 years old. 20 years of experience behind the wheel. Never had an accident. Never even a serious complaint. People said he knew that desert road like the back of his hand. He'd driven it hundreds of times, in every season, in every kind of weather. If anyone could handle that lonely stretch of highway, it was Marcus. His co-workers at the bus depot described him as reliable, cautious, and professional. He had a wife and 2 teenage sons waiting for him back home. He was planning to retire in 5 years and buy a fishing boat. He'd already picked out the model. Among the passengers were Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old nurse traveling with her 2 daughters, Emma age 8 and Sophie age 11. They were moving to San Francisco for Sarah's new job at a children's hospital. Sarah had packed their entire lives into 6 suitcases. The girls were excited and nervous, clutching their stuffed animals as they boarded the bus. Emma had a worn teddy bear. Sophie had a rabbit with one ear missing. These details would later haunt investigators as they tried to piece together what happened. David and Emma Rodriguez were also on the bus. Newlyweds on their way to their honeymoon in Lake Tahoe. They'd gotten married just 3 days earlier in a small ceremony in Reno. David was 28, a construction worker. Emma was 26, an elementary school teacher. They'd saved for 2 years to afford their honeymoon. They sat together in the middle of the bus, David's arm around Emma's shoulders, both of them looking out the window and pointing at the desert landscape, talking about their future. Professor William Hayes, 67 years old, a retired geology professor, was heading home to Sacramento. He'd been in Reno for a conference on desert formations and had extended his trip by a few days to do some field research. His briefcase was filled with rock samples and notebooks full of observations. He sat near the front, occasionally chatting with Marcus Chun about the geological features they passed. There was also Margaret Chun, no relation to the driver, a 72-year-old woman visiting her grandchildren in California. Robert Patterson, a 45-year-old salesman who traveled this route monthly. Lisa and Tom Brennan, a couple in their 30s, moving to California for a fresh start. 3 college students, Jennifer, Mike, and Carlos, heading back to school after summer break. A young woman named Amanda Price, 23, traveling to meet her fiancé. And 3 others whose names would later become part of the official record: James Foster, Maria Gonzalez, and Stephen Wright. And then there was Daniel Cooper, 29 years old, quiet, kept to himself. He sat in the very back row, wearing sunglasses even though they left before sunrise. Other passengers would later be described in detail by their families, their friends, their co-workers. But Daniel Cooper was different. He had no family that came forward, no friends who spoke to the media. He worked as a night janitor at an office building in Reno. His landlord described him as quiet, always paid rent on time, never caused problems. He was alone in the world, and soon, he would be the only one left to tell the tale. At 6:15 a.m., 15 minutes late because of a mechanical check on the bus's air conditioning system, the bus pulled out of Reno. Security cameras caught it leaving the station. That footage has been analyzed hundreds of times over the years. Investigators have studied every frame, looking for anything unusual. But there's nothing. Just a normal bus. Normal people. Starting what should have been a normal trip. You can see Sarah Mitchell helping her daughters find their seats. You can see David Rodriguez loading bags into the undercarriage. You can see Marcus Chun doing his final walk-around inspection. Everything was routine. The bus headed east out of Reno, then turned south on a Highway 50. The highway stretched out before them, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of desert. On both sides, the landscape was harsh and beautiful. Mountains in the distance, their peaks still holding snow even in July. Closer to the road, the desert floor was dotted with sagebrush and the occasional Joshua tree. The sky was massive, endless, the kind of sky that makes you feel very small. The first hour of the journey was uneventful. Passengers dozed, read books, listened to music on their Walkmans. This was 1987, before smartphones, before constant connectivity. When you took a long bus ride, you were disconnected from the world. You watched the scenery pass by. You thought your own thoughts. You talked to your neighbor if you were feeling social, or you stayed quiet if you weren't. The bus made its first stop in Fallon, Nevada, around 8 a.m. Fallon is a small agricultural town, a green oasis in the brown desert, kept alive by irrigation from the nearby reservoir. It's home to a naval air station, which means you often see fighter jets screaming overhead. But that morning was quiet. Gas station cameras recorded passengers getting off the bus, stretching their legs, buying snacks and coffee. The footage shows them acting completely normal. Sarah Mitchell bought juice boxes for her daughters. Professor Hayes bought a newspaper. The Rodriguez couple shared a candy bar. Daniel Cooper bought a pack of cigarettes and stood apart from the others, smoking and staring at the horizon. Everything seemed fine. Marcus Chun talked to the gas station attendant, a young man named Kyle Rodriguez, about the weather. "It's going to be a hot one," Marcus said. "At least 105 out there in the desert. Maybe hotter." Kyle would later tell police that Marcus seemed completely normal, relaxed, maybe even looking forward to the drive. He loved the desert, Kyle said. He always talked about how peaceful it was. Marcus Chun had no idea how right he was about the heat. And he had no idea what was waiting for them on that lonely highway. At 8:47 a.m., the bus left Fallon. This was the last confirmed sighting by anyone in town. The bus headed east on Highway 50 into the real desert. After Fallon, the road becomes truly remote. The next town, Austin, was over 100 miles away. In between, there's almost nothing. A few ranches scattered far from the road. Some dirt roads leading to abandoned mines. But mostly, it's just emptiness. Miles and miles of emptiness. This stretch of highway has a reputation. Locals call it the loneliest road, not just because of the emptiness, but because of something else. There's a feeling you get out there. A sense of isolation so complete it can mess with your mind. Some people love it. They find it meditative, cleansing. Others find it oppressive. Like the desert is watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. There are stories about Highway 50. There have always been stories. Long before 1987, travelers reported strange things. Lights in the desert that didn't belong to any vehicle. Sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. Mirages that looked too real. Most people dismissed these stories as the desert playing tricks. Heat distortion. Loneliness causing hallucinations. Desert madness. But the old-timers, the ranchers who'd lived there for generations, they knew better. They had their own stories. Stories passed down from their grandparents, who'd heard them from the Native Americans who'd lived there for thousands of years before white settlers arrived. Stories about places in the desert where people disappeared, about spirits that walked the sand, about doorways to other worlds. The Shoshone and Paiute tribes had always avoided certain areas. They had names for these places, warnings. But by 1987, most of those warnings had been forgotten, dismissed as superstition. At 10:47 a.m., a trucker named Ray Patterson was driving eastbound on Highway 50, heading toward Fallon. Ray was 56 years old, had been a long-haul trucker for 30 years. He'd driven across America more times than he could count. He'd seen everything there was to see on the American highway. Or so he thought. Ray saw the Greyhound bus coming toward him in the opposite lane, heading east. He remembers the moment clearly. In fact, it's burned into his memory. He's had nightmares about it ever since. At first, the bus looked normal. Just another vehicle on a lonely road. But as it got closer, Ray noticed something odd. All the passengers were looking up. Every single person inside that bus had their face turned toward the ceiling, like they were all staring at the same thing. Even the driver. Marcus Chin's hands were on the wheel. The bus was traveling straight and steady, but his head was tilted back, his face pointed at the roof of the bus. Ray slowed down, uneasy. He couldn't see what they were looking at. There was nothing visible on the roof of the bus. Nothing hanging from the ceiling inside. But all 19 people were staring up with identical expressions. Focused. Intent. Almost hypnotized. The two vehicles passed each other. Ray looked in his rearview mirror. The bus continued down the highway, moving at a steady speed, staying in its lane. But everyone inside was still looking up. For about 5 seconds, Ray could see the bus receding in his mirror. Then it went around a curve and disappeared from view. That was the last time anyone saw that bus. The last confirmed sighting. 10:47 a.m., July 15, 1987, on Highway 50, somewhere between Fallon and Austin, Nevada. Ray Patterson continued driving toward Fallon. He didn't think much of it at the time. It was weird, sure, but maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe a bird had gotten into the bus. Maybe there was a wasp nest. Maybe Marcus was pointing out something on the ceiling. Weird, but not alarming. It wasn't until 3 days later, when Ray heard about the missing bus, that he realized what he'd seen. He immediately called the police and gave his statement. Investigators questioned him multiple times, trying to find any inconsistency in his story. But Ray's account never changed. Not one detail. He knew what he'd seen. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, the bus should have arrived in Austin, Nevada. Austin is a tiny town, barely 200 people, nestled in the mountains. It's a former mining town, one of many in Nevada, kept alive mostly by the handful of travelers who stop for gas and food on their way across the state. The bus was scheduled for a 30-minute stop there, but it never arrived. At first, the station manager in Austin wasn't concerned. Buses ran late sometimes. Flat tire. Engine trouble. Maybe they stopped somewhere for a longer lunch break. He called the company dispatch to check in, but they hadn't heard from Marcus Chun since his scheduled radio check-in at 9:30 a.m., shortly after leaving Fallon. Still, no one panicked. Not yet. Radio dead zones were common in the Nevada desert. Mountains blocked signals. Valleys created interference. Marcus would call when he got to better reception. But when 4 p.m. came, and then 5 p.m., and there was still no sign of the bus, the station manager called the police. And by 6 p.m., when the bus failed to arrive at its next scheduled stop, the Nevada State Police officially began searching for a missing Greyhound bus with 19 people aboard. Highway patrol officers were dispatched immediately. They drove the entire route from Fallon to Austin, 112 miles of highway. They drove slowly, carefully, scanning both sides of the road, looking for any sign of the bus. Skid marks, broken glass, debris, anything that might indicate an accident. They found nothing. The highway was empty and pristine. No evidence that the bus had ever been there at all. This made no sense. A 40-foot bus, 19 people, couldn't just vanish. If they'd gone off the road, there would be tire marks. If they'd crashed, there would be wreckage. Even if the bus had somehow ended up far from the highway, there would be tracks showing where it left the road. But there was nothing. As darkness fell on July 15th, search and rescue teams were mobilized. This was now a major emergency. Volunteers gathered in Fallon and Austin, preparing to search at first light. The families of the passengers were notified, and across Nevada, people went to bed wondering how a bus could simply disappear. Sarah Mitchell's mother, Patricia, got the call at 9 p.m. She was in Ohio, 2,000 miles away. The woman from the bus company was careful, saying that the bus was delayed and they were looking into it. But Patricia knew. A mother knows. She booked the first flight to Nevada that night, arriving in Reno the next morning with photos of her daughter and granddaughters, ready to do whatever it took to find them. David Rodriguez's parents got a similar call. They lived in Los Angeles and drove through the night to Nevada, arriving exhausted and terrified just after dawn. Emma's family came too. Two families who'd been celebrating a joyous wedding just days ago now found themselves in a nightmare. Professor Hayes's wife was notified. The college students' parents were called. Slowly, the families gathered in Nevada, drawn by that terrible pull that comes when someone you love is missing. Hope and dread in equal measure. July 16th dawned hot and clear. Perfect weather for searching. Helicopters took off at sunrise, flying the length of Highway 50, covering miles on either side of the road. Trained search and rescue volunteers spread out across the desert in organized grid patterns. Every ravine was checked, every cluster of rocks, every dry wash. The helicopters flew low, their crews scanning the desert floor with binoculars. The desert in Nevada is not flat. It's full of hills, valleys, gullies. There are places where a bus could potentially end up hidden from the highway. But the helicopter crews knew what they were doing. They'd found crashed planes, lost hikers, vehicles that had gone off the road. They knew how to search desert terrain. But they found nothing. Ground teams walked miles through the brutal heat. The temperature reached 110 degrees by midday. Volunteers had to rotate out frequently to avoid heat exhaustion. They carried water, radios, and maps, checking off each section of the search grid as they covered it. They looked for footprints, tire tracks, pieces of clothing, anything that might indicate people had passed through. Nothing. On the evening of July 16th, the lead investigator, Detective Sarah Brennan of the Nevada State Police, held a press conference. She was 38 years old, had been with the state police for 15 years, and had worked dozens of missing persons cases. But nothing like this. She stood in front of television cameras and reporters, with the desperate families standing behind her, and admitted that they had no leads, no evidence, no idea where the bus could be. She asked the public for help. Anyone who'd been on Highway 50 on July 15th. Anyone who'd seen anything unusual. Anyone with information. The tip line was flooded with calls. People reported seeing buses in various locations, but each lead turned out to be different buses. Some calls were from well-meaning people with wild theories. Some were from psychics claiming to have visions. One woman called to say she'd been abducted by aliens in Nevada in 1952, and maybe the same thing had happened to the bus passengers. The investigators followed up on every credible lead, but none led anywhere. The search continued on July 17th. More helicopters, more ground teams. The FBI sent agents to assist. This was now a federal case. The possibility of kidnapping was discussed. Could someone have hijacked the bus, forced it off the road, taken the passengers somewhere? But hijacking a bus is not easy. It requires planning, multiple people, vehicles to transport the passengers. And why? There was no ransom demand. No terrorist organization claiming responsibility. No motive. Some investigators quietly wondered if it could be connected to organized crime. Nevada had its share of mob connections. But again, there was no evidence. No reason for the mob to target a random bus full of ordinary people. The search area expanded. Teams went 20 miles on either side of Highway 50. They covered hundreds of square miles of desert. And still, nothing. By the evening of July 17th, hope was fading. Not gone, but fading. Families wept. Press coverage intensified. The story went national. America watched and wondered, how does this happen? How do 19 people vanish in the middle of the United States in 1987? This wasn't the Amazon jungle or the Australian outback. This was Nevada. There were roads, towns, people. How? July 18th. The third day of the search. The third day since the bus vanished. At 2:30 p.m., a rancher named Tom McKenzie was checking his fence line on his property about 40 miles south of Highway 50, deep in the desert. Tom was 61 years old, had ranched that land for 35 years. He knew every inch of his property. He knew when something was out of place. And something was definitely out of place. Tom saw a figure in the distance, moving across his land. At first, he thought it might be an illegal immigrant. This close to Mexico, that happened sometimes. But as he drove closer in his pickup truck, he realized this person wasn't walking purposefully. They were stumbling, weaving, moving like someone who was about to collapse. Tom accelerated, dust kicking up behind his truck. As he got closer, he could see it was a young man. His clothes were torn and filthy. His face was burned dark red from the sun. He had no shoes. His feet were bleeding, leaving small dark spots in the sand behind him. Tom jumped out of his truck and ran to him. The man looked at Tom with eyes that didn't quite focus. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He was shaking despite the heat. "Son, you okay? What happened?" Tom asked. The man opened his mouth, but at first, nothing came out. Then, in a voice like dry paper, he whispered. The sun blinked. Tom caught him as he collapsed. He was surprisingly light, like he'd lost a lot of weight very quickly. Tom got him into the truck, gave him water from his cooler, and immediately radioed for help. He didn't have a cell phone in those days. Most ranchers used CB radios. He called his wife, who called 911. Within 20 minutes, an ambulance and 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at Tom's ranch. The young man was semi-conscious, still whispering the same thing over and over. The sun blinked. The sun blinked. One of the deputies asked his name. It took several tries, but finally, the man managed to answer. Daniel. Daniel Cooper. The deputies looked at each other. Daniel Cooper had been on the manifest of the missing bus. They'd found one of the passengers. The ambulance rushed Daniel to the hospital in Reno, sirens wailing. Detective Sarah Brennan was notified immediately and met them at the emergency room. Finally, after 3 days of dead ends and frustration, they had something. They had a survivor. Someone who could tell them what happened. But Daniel Cooper was in no condition to talk. Not yet. The doctors worked on him quickly. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, second-degree sunburn over most of his exposed skin. His feet were torn up from walking barefoot over rocks and desert floor. He'd lost 15 pounds in 3 days. He was suffering from heat exhaustion and exposure. But he would survive. Physically, at least. The real question was about his mental state. As the nurses started in for and administered fluids, Daniel stared at the ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. His lips moved constantly, though no sound came out. The doctors recognized the signs of trauma and shock. Detective Brennan wanted to question him immediately, but the doctors wouldn't allow it. Daniel needed rest, fluids, and time. Questioning him now, in his current state, would likely get them nothing useful and could make his condition worse. So Brennan waited. She stayed at the hospital, drinking terrible coffee from the vending machine, staring at Daniel's hospital room door, desperate for answers. Where was the bus? Where were the other 18 people? What had happened out there in the desert? The families were notified that a survivor had been found. There was a moment of hope. Maybe he would lead them to the others. Maybe everyone was alive, just lost in the desert somewhere. Search and rescue teams prepared to deploy again, waiting for Daniel to tell them where to look. But that hope would soon turn to something else. Something colder. For 2 days, Daniel Cooper didn't speak. July 19th and 20th passed with him lying in that hospital bed, staring at nothing, occasionally whimpering in his sleep. Nurses checked on him regularly. His physical condition improved. The fluids rehydrated him. The burns were treated. His feet were bandaged. But mentally, he seemed far away. Psychiatrists came to evaluate him. Dr. Ellen Martinez, a specialist in trauma, sat by his bed for hours, speaking softly, trying to reach him. Sometimes his eyes would track her movements, suggesting he was aware of her presence. But he didn't respond. On July 21st, 6 days after the bus vanished, Daniel finally spoke. It was early morning, just after dawn. A nurse was checking his vitals when he suddenly sat up in bed and said, clear as day. They walked into the sun. The nurse immediately called Detective Brennan, who'd left strict orders to be notified of any change. Brennan arrived within 30 minutes, bringing a recorder and a notepad. Dr. Martinez was called in as well to monitor Daniel's mental state during questioning. Brennan sat down next to Daniel's bed. He was sitting up now, looking out the window at the morning sky. His hands gripped the bedsheets tightly. Daniel, Brennan said gently, I'm Detective Sarah Brennan. Can you tell me what happened? Daniel turned to look at her. His eyes were clearer now, but there was something in them. Fear. Deep, primal fear. We stopped, he said. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Where did you stop? Brennan asked. On the highway. Everyone saw it. Saw what, Daniel? There was a long pause. Daniel's hands tightened on the sheets. Then he said, the sun. It blinked. Brennan exchanged a glance with Dr. Martinez, who made a small note, but gestured for Brennan to continue. What do you mean the sun blinked? Daniel took a shaky breath. We were driving. I was in the back, looking out the window. It was hot, bright. The sun was so bright it hurt to look at. And then it went dark. Just for a second. Like someone turned off a light switch. The sun went black, and then it came back on. Like an eclipse? Brennan asked. No, Daniel said firmly. Not like an eclipse. There was no moon. No shadow. The sun just blinked. Off and on. 1 second. And what happened then? The bus stopped. Marcus, the driver, he pulled over. Everyone was confused. Scared. We were all asking what happened. What was that? And then, he trailed off, his eyes going distant. Then what, Daniel? The light was wrong, he whispered. When the sun came back on, the light was wrong. I can't explain it. It looked the same, but felt different. Like it was coming from the wrong direction. Or the wrong distance. Something was wrong with it. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. This was textbook hallucination, possibly brought on by heat and dehydration. But she kept her expression neutral. Brennan continued. What did everyone do? They got off the bus, Daniel said. One by one. Like they'd all agreed to it without saying anything. Sarah went first, holding her daughter's hands. Then the professor. Then the married couple. Everyone. Did Marcus go too? Yes. He left the bus running and just walked away from it. Which direction did they go? South. Into the desert. Away from the road. And you followed them? At first. I got off the bus too. I didn't want to be alone. But then I stopped. I looked back at the bus, at the highway, and something in me said this was wrong. This wasn't right. We should stay with the bus. Wait for help. What made you stop, Daniel? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I closed my eyes. When the sun blinked, it felt like I should close my eyes. Like something inside me knew not to look. So I did. I closed my eyes for just a second. And I think that's why I'm different. Why I could still think clearly. Different from the others? They weren't thinking. They were just walking. I tried to stop them. I grabbed Sarah's arm, tried to turn her around. But she looked at me like she didn't see me. Her eyes were empty, peaceful. She just pulled away and kept walking. They all did. Like they were sleepwalking. Did they say anything? No. Nothing. They didn't talk to each other. Didn't talk to me. Just walked. Was there anything else out there? Anyone else? Any vehicles? Daniel shook his head. Nothing. Just desert. And them, walking. And that wrong light. What happened next? I stood there for a while, watching them. They got smaller and smaller. I thought about following. Part of me wanted to, but I was scared, really scared. So I ran. I ran the other way. East, I think. Away from them. I don't know how far. Miles. Until I couldn't run anymore. Then I walked. Then I crawled. The desert all looks the same. I got lost. I ran out of water. I thought I was going to die. And then that rancher found me. Daniel, do you remember exactly where you got off the bus? Any landmarks? He shook his head. It all looks the same out there. There was nothing special about the spot. Just highway and desert. And you didn't see what happened to the bus itself. No. I was too focused on the people. On trying to understand what was happening. When I ran, I didn't look back. Detective Brennan asked more questions, going over every detail multiple times. But Daniel's story remained consistent. The sun blinked. The light changed. The passengers walked into the desert. He ran the other way. Dr. Martinez spoke with Brennan privately after the interview. Her professional opinion was that Daniel was experiencing trauma-induced delusions. The stress of whatever had actually happened, combined with dehydration and exposure, had created false memories. The blinking sun was likely a hallucination. The passengers probably did leave the bus for some reason, but the supernatural elements were his mind trying to make sense of something it couldn't process. But Brennan wasn't entirely convinced. Not because she believed in blinking suns, but because Daniel seemed so certain. His fears seemed genuine. Whatever happened out there, Daniel Cooper believed every word he was saying. Based on Daniel's information, search teams deployed again. They focused on the area where Daniel had been found, working backward to try to determine where he'd come from. 40 miles south of Highway 50. If he'd run east and the other passengers had walked south, then the bus must have stopped somewhere in that region. Helicopters flew search patterns. Ground teams walked in expanding circles. And on July 22nd, they found something. Footprints. The prints were about 30 miles south of Highway 50, in an area of soft sand. Multiple sets of footprints, at least a dozen different shoe patterns, all heading in the same direction. South, deeper into the desert. The search teams photographed everything. Forensic specialists were brought in to analyze the prints. They measured stride length, shoe size, tread patterns. They took casts of the clearest prints. The analysis confirmed what everyone hoped and feared. The footprints matched the types of shoes the passengers had been wearing. Sarah Mitchell's practical nursing shoes. David Rodriguez's work boots. Emma Rodriguez's canvas sneakers. Professor Hayes's dress shoes. They were all there. This was them. This was proof that at least some of the passengers had walked into the desert, just as Daniel said. But the footprints created as many questions as they answered. Because after about 2 miles, the footprints simply stopped. Not gradually, not spreading out as people wandered different directions. They just ended. In the middle of nowhere, in an area with no shelter, no water, no reason for anyone to stop, the tracks disappeared. The search teams scoured the area where the prints ended. They looked for bodies, for any sign of what might have happened. But there was nothing. Just the desert floor, undisturbed, as if the people had simply vanished into thin air. Some investigators theorized that wind had erased the later tracks. Desert winds can be strong, and sand shifts constantly. But the area where the prints ended wasn't particularly sandy. It was hard-packed dirt and rock. Wind wouldn't erase footprints from that surface. Others suggested that the people might have walked onto rockier terrain where prints wouldn't show. Teams searched for miles in every direction from where the tracks ended, looking for any continuation. They found nothing. The most disturbing theory was the simplest. The footprints stopped because that's where the people stopped existing. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The FBI became more involved. Special agents who specialized in missing persons, in kidnapping, in unusual cases. They interviewed Daniel Cooper multiple times. They brought in their own psychiatrists to evaluate him. They used polygraph tests. Daniel passed the polygraph. Or more accurately, the polygraph showed that Daniel believed he was telling the truth. That doesn't mean it actually happened the way he described, just that he believed it did. The FBI agents were thorough and professional. They considered every possibility. Had Daniel killed the other passengers? The timeline didn't work. He couldn't have killed 18 people, hidden their bodies so well that trained search teams couldn't find them, and then survived 3 days in the desert in his condition. It wasn't physically possible. Had he been part of a larger conspiracy? Again, there was no evidence. No connections to any criminal organizations. No motive. Daniel Cooper was a janitor who barely made enough money to pay his rent. He had no military training, no criminal record, no connections to anything suspicious. The agents searched for the bus itself. If someone had hijacked the bus and taken it somewhere, where could it be? They checked every road, every mine entrance, every building within 100 miles. They reviewed satellite imagery. They talked to every resident in the region. The bus had simply vanished. The case generated massive media attention. Television news programs covered it nightly. Newspapers ran front-page stories. Families made tearful pleas on camera. Sarah Mitchell's mother, Patricia, became the face of the families. She appeared on every major network, holding a photo of her daughter and granddaughters, begging for information. The reward money grew. First, $50,000 from the Rodriguez family. Then other families added more. The bus company added money. Local businesses contributed. Eventually, the reward reached $200,000 for information leading to the location of the missing passengers. Tips poured in. Some were genuine attempts to help. Most were dead ends. Some were cruel. People calling with false information or claiming to have seen the passengers when they hadn't. Each tip was investigated. Each one led nowhere. Psychics called, claiming to have visions. One woman said she saw the passengers in a cave system under the desert. Search teams checked every known cave in the region. Nothing. Another psychic said the bus was at the bottom of a lake. But there were no lakes near Highway 50 except for the reservoirs near Fallon, which were searched and found nothing. Conspiracy theories began to spread. This was 1987, before the internet, but theories spread through newspapers, radio shows, and word of mouth. Some people believed it was connected to Area 51, the secret military base about 100 miles away. Maybe the passengers had stumbled upon something classified. Maybe they'd been taken by the government. Others believed it was aliens. UFO researchers descended on Nevada, investigating, interviewing witnesses, looking for connections to other unexplained disappearances. Some fundamentalist religious groups claimed it was the rapture, that the passengers had been taken to heaven. But that didn't explain why only 18 people on one bus were taken and not others. The theories got wilder. Time travel, dimensional portals, secret underground bases, black helicopters. None of it was supported by evidence. But in the absence of a rational explanation, people grasped at irrational ones. Detective Brennan continued investigating. This case consumed her. She couldn't let it go. She interviewed Daniel Cooper many more times over the following months, trying to find some detail he'd forgotten, some clue that would break the case open. In one interview, several weeks after Daniel was released from the hospital, he told her something new, something he hadn't mentioned before, maybe because his memory was still unclear at first, or maybe because he was afraid of how crazy it would sound. When the sun blinked, he said, there was a sound. What kind of sound? Brennan asked. Low, deep, like a hum, but not just a sound. I could feel it, in my chest, in my bones. It made everything vibrate. How long did it last? Just a few seconds. It started right when the sun went dark, and stopped when it came back on. But in those few seconds, I felt like my whole body was vibrating, like I was standing next to a massive speaker. Did anyone else react to it? Everyone did. That's when Marcus stopped the bus. Everyone looked confused, scared. We all felt it. This new detail intrigued Brennan. A sound, or vibration, accompanying the visual phenomenon. She consulted with scientists at the University of Nevada. Could there be a natural explanation? Some kind of seismic activity? They checked. There had been no earthquakes in Nevada on July 15th, 1987. No seismic activity at all in that region. What about military activity? Sonic booms from jets? The Fallon Naval Air Station did training exercises, but records showed no flights in that area at that time. And a sonic boom wouldn't cause the sun to appear to blink. Atmospheric phenomena, ball lightning, electromagnetic pulses? Every scientific explanation was explored. None fit the evidence. One physicist suggested that what Daniel experienced might have been related to infrasound, extremely low-frequency sound waves that can cause feelings of unease, dread, and even visual hallucinations. Infrasound can be produced by natural sources like earthquakes, volcanoes, or even wind passing over certain terrain. But again, there was no source for such infrasound on that day in that location. An infrasound wouldn't explain the footprints. It wouldn't explain 18 people disappearing. Months passed. The search was officially scaled back, though it was never formally closed. The families held memorial services. Without bodies, there could be no funerals, no burials, no real closure. Just empty ceremonies and unanswered prayers. Sarah Mitchell's mother, Patricia, held a memorial for her daughter and granddaughters in September. The church was packed. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, all mourning 3 lives that had simply vanished. Patricia stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're alive or dead. But I know that somewhere, somehow, they still exist. A mother knows. And I will never stop looking. She kept that promise. Until the day she died in 2015, Patricia searched. She hired private investigators. She traveled to Nevada multiple times a year, walking the desert, looking for any sign. She posted flyers in every town along Highway 50. She maintained a website dedicated to the case before most people even knew what a website was. She never found anything. The Rodriguez family held their memorial in October. David and Emma, who should have been starting their married life together, were mourned by 2 grieving families. Emma's mother stood next to David's mother, both women holding each other up, united in their grief. Professor Hayes's wife held a small, private ceremony. She donated his rock collection to the university where he'd taught. She couldn't bear to keep it, couldn't look at those pieces of the desert without thinking of where he'd disappeared. One by one, the families tried to move forward. Some succeeded, at least on the surface. Others were destroyed by the loss. 2 marriages ended. One father drank himself to death within 5 years. A mother suffered a complete breakdown and spent years in psychiatric care. The not knowing was the worst part. Death, as terrible as it is, offers closure. You bury your loved one. You grieve. Eventually, you heal. But when someone vanishes without a trace, there's no closure. Just endless questions. Endless hope that maybe, just maybe, they're still alive somewhere. Daniel Cooper tried to rebuild his life. He was the only survivor, the only witness, and that made him both valuable and suspect in some people's eyes. Some families blamed him. If he survived, why couldn't their loved ones? What did he do? What wasn't he telling them? Daniel moved away from Reno. He couldn't stand being there anymore. Couldn't stand the looks people gave him, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room. He moved to a small town in Oregon, changed his name legally to David Miller, and tried to disappear himself. He worked as a maintenance man at an apartment complex. He lived alone. He didn't make friends. He kept his head down and his past hidden. For years, he succeeded in staying anonymous. But the anniversary of the disappearance brought media attention every year. And sometimes, reporters would track him down. Sometimes, a family member would find him, desperate for answers he couldn't give. And every time, Daniel would relive that day in the desert. In 1995, 8 years after the disappearance, a journalist named Michael Torres found Daniel and convinced him to do an interview. It was published in a true crime magazine and later turned into a TV documentary. In that interview, Daniel spoke more openly than he ever had before. He talked about the guilt, the survivor's guilt that ate at him every day. Why had he survived when 18 others hadn't? What made him different? Was it really just because he closed his eyes at the right moment? Or was there something else? He talked about the nightmares. Almost every night, he dreamed about that day. In his dreams, he didn't run. He followed the others into the desert. He walked and walked under that wrong light, and eventually, he'd reach a place where the sun split open like an eye, and something beyond comprehension looked down at him. He'd wake up screaming. He talked about going back. Several times over the years, Daniel had driven back to Nevada, to Highway 50, trying to find the exact spot where it happened. But he could never be sure. The desert all looked the same. Every mile of Highway 50 looked like every other mile. He'd stand on the side of the road, looking south into the emptiness, and wonder what was out there. Were the others still walking? Were they dead? Were they somewhere else entirely? Somewhere he couldn't imagine? The interviewer asked Daniel if he still believed what he'd originally said. About the sun blinking. About the wrong light. 8 years later, with time to reflect, did he still believe that's what happened? Daniel's answer was immediate. Yes, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. People can think I'm crazy if they want. But I was there. I know the truth. What is the truth? The interviewer asked. Daniel was quiet for a long time before answering. The truth is that there are things in this world we don't understand. Things that don't follow the rules we think are absolute. That day, something broke through. Something came through. And it took them. Took them where? I don't know. Somewhere else. Somewhere not here. The interviewer pressed him. You're saying this was supernatural? Extraterrestrial. I'm saying it was impossible. But it happened anyway. The interview reignited interest in the case. The documentary brought new attention. More tips came in, though none led anywhere. The FBI reviewed the case again, but with no new evidence. There was nothing more they could do. Detective Sarah Brennan, who had retired from the Nevada State Police in 1992, watched the documentary from her home in Reno. The case had haunted her entire career. She'd worked hundreds of cases, solved most of them, but this one remained open. Unsolved. Unexplained. She still had boxes of files in her garage. Evidence photos. Interview transcripts. Maps of the search area. She couldn't let it go, even in retirement. Sometimes she'd pull out the files and go through them again, hoping to see something she'd missed. She'd driven Highway 50 dozens of times after the disappearance, always watching, always hoping to see something that would explain it. She never did. In 1998, something happened that briefly seemed like it might be connected. A hiker found a child's shoe in the desert, about 50 miles south of Highway 50. Not far from where the footprints had been found 11 years earlier. The shoe was small, worn, the kind a young girl might wear. It was partially buried in sand, weathered by years of sun and wind. The hiker, knowing about the famous disappearance, immediately called the police. The shoe was analyzed. It matched the description of shoes that Sophie Mitchell, Sarah's 11-year-old daughter, had been wearing. The brand was right. The size was right. The color, though faded, was right. DNA testing was performed. In 1998, DNA technology was more advanced than it had been in 1987. But the results were inconclusive. Too much degradation from exposure to the elements. They couldn't definitively say it was Sophie's shoe. But they couldn't rule it out either. Patricia Mitchell, Sarah's mother, was shown the shoe. She held it in her hands, tears streaming down her face. That's hers, she whispered. I know it is. I bought her those shoes. The area where the shoe was found was searched again, exhaustively. If the shoe was Sophie's, maybe there were other remains nearby. Maybe, after 11 years, they'd finally find the answers. They found nothing else. Just that one shoe, alone in the desert. The discovery was both hopeful and devastating for the families. It suggested that at least some of the passengers had made it that far into the desert. But it didn't explain where they'd gone after that. And if they'd died there, where were the bodies? Sarah Brennan examined the shoe carefully. She noted where it was found, the condition it was in. 11 years in the Nevada desert should have destroyed it more than it had. The material should have been more brittle, more sun-damaged. It was as if the shoe had only been there for a year or two, not over a decade. But maybe that was wishful thinking. Maybe the desert had just been kinder to that shoe than expected. Years continued to pass. The case faded from public consciousness. It became one of those unsolved mysteries that people occasionally talked about, usually late at night, usually when discussing the strange and unexplained. It appeared in books about unsolved crimes. It was featured on TV shows about mysteries. It became part of American folklore. Highway 50 gained an even eerier reputation. Some people avoided it entirely, taking longer routes to cross Nevada. Others were drawn to it, hoping to see something unusual, hoping to solve the mystery themselves. Strange reports continued to come in over the years. In 2001, a couple driving Highway 50 at night claimed they saw a bus on the side of the road. It appeared suddenly in their headlights. They slowed down to offer help, but as they got closer, the bus vanished. Just disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. They called the police, but by the time officers arrived at the location, there was nothing there. No tire tracks. No evidence a bus had ever been there. The couple was sober, coherent, and genuinely shaken. They had no reason to make up the story. But without evidence, it was just another strange tale from Highway 50. In 2003, the shoe was found. In 2005, a construction crew working on a highway expansion project found something else. Buried about 3 feet underground, mixed with dirt and rock, they found a piece of metal with faded lettering. When cleaned, the lettering said Greyhound. It was a piece of the bus, a fragment of the side panel, about 2 feet by 2 feet. The metal was twisted, as if exposed to intense heat or pressure. But how had it ended up buried in the ground? And where was the rest of the bus? The location where the fragment was found was near Highway 50, but not on the route where the bus had disappeared. It was about 30 miles east, in an area the bus had already passed through before reaching the point where Ray Patterson had seen it. This made no sense. Had someone brought the fragment there and buried it? Why? Or had the bus somehow traveled backward? That was impossible. The fragment was analyzed by metallurgists. The metal had definitely been exposed to extreme temperatures, possibly exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The edges showed signs of rapid cooling, creating a crystalline structure that shouldn't exist in normal bus metal. One scientist suggested the metal had been exposed to something like a plasma field. But buses don't encounter plasma fields. The only places you'd find those temperatures and conditions would be in industrial furnaces, or in certain military applications, or possibly in extreme natural phenomena like lightning strikes. But the fragment showed no signs of a lightning strike. The damage was uniform, not localized like a lightning impact would be. It was another piece of evidence that created more questions than answers. Daniel Cooper, now living under his assumed name in Oregon, heard about the fragment discovery on the news. He sat in his small apartment, staring at the television, and felt a chill run through him. He'd been trying to move on, trying to forget. He'd married in 2002, though he'd never told his wife about his past. As far as she knew, he was just David Miller, a quiet man who worked maintenance and kept to himself. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. How do you explain to someone that you're the sole survivor of one of America's most famous unsolved mysteries? But the news of the bus fragment brought it all back. That day in the desert, the blinking sun, the wrong light, the people walking away from him with empty, peaceful eyes. That night, he told his wife everything. She listened in shocked silence as he explained who he really was, what had happened, why he'd changed his name. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wondered if her husband was mentally ill. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine fear and pain there, she believed him. Their marriage didn't survive. She couldn't handle being married to someone with that kind of past, that kind of trauma. They divorced in 2006. Daniel didn't blame her. He'd known it was a risk, telling her, but he'd been tired of hiding. After the divorce, Daniel became more reclusive. He stopped working. He lived off savings and odd jobs. He spent most of his time alone, reading about physics, about desert phenomena, about unsolved mysteries. He was searching for an explanation, any explanation that would make sense of what happened. He read about quantum mechanics, about parallel universes, about time distortions. He read accounts from other people who claimed to have experienced missing time or strange phenomena in the desert. He read about ancient Native American legends of doorways to other worlds. Nothing fully explained what he'd experienced, but some things came close. Some theories about the nature of reality, about dimensions beyond our perception, about places where the laws of physics break down. In 2010, Daniel was diagnosed with cancer. Lung cancer, probably from all those years of smoking. The doctors gave him a year, maybe two, with treatment. He declined aggressive treatment. He was 52 years old and tired of fighting. As his health declined, he decided to go back one more time. Back to Nevada. Back to Highway 50. He wanted to see it again before he died. Maybe find some kind of peace. He drove from Oregon to Nevada in the spring of 2011, taking his time, staying in cheap motels along the way. His body was failing, but his mind was clear. Clearer than it had been in years, actually. The cancer had brought a strange kind of clarity. He reached Highway 50 in early May. The desert was beautiful that time of year, cooler than summer, the hills dotted with wildflowers. He pulled over at a rest stop and just sat there, looking out at the landscape. This was where it had happened. Somewhere along this stretch of road. 24 years ago, half his lifetime ago, Daniel got out of his car and walked out into the desert. He walked south, the same direction he'd seen the others walk. His body was weak, and he couldn't go far. Maybe half a mile before he had to stop and rest. He sat on a rock, breathing hard, and looked around. The desert was silent except for the wind. Empty, vast, indifferent to human suffering. And then something happened. Daniel felt it first. That same vibration he'd felt 24 years ago. Low and deep, resonating in his chest. His heart rate spiked. He looked up at the sun. It was stable, bright, normal. But the feeling was there. Unmistakable. The same sensation. He stood up, despite the pain in his weakened body, and turned in a slow circle, looking for the source. There was nothing. No vehicles. No aircraft. No visible source for the vibration. And then, just for a moment, he saw something. A shimmer in the air, about 100 yards away. Like heat distortion, but more defined. It had a shape. Vertical. Tall. Like a doorway standing alone in the desert. Daniel stared at it. His mind raced. Was this real? Was this what had happened all those years ago? Was this what the others had walked toward? He took a step toward it. Then another. Part of him wanted to run away, to get back to his car and drive as fast as possible. But another part of him, the part that had lived with questions for 24 years, needed to know. He walked toward the shimmer. The vibration grew stronger. His vision began to blur at the edges. The light seemed wrong, just like it had before. The same wrongness. Daniel was within 50 feet of the shimmer when he stopped. His survival instinct kicked in. The same instinct that had made him run 24 years ago. He couldn't do this. He couldn't walk through. He stood there, frozen between curiosity and terror. And then the shimmer faded. The vibration stopped. Everything returned to normal. Daniel collapsed to his knees, sobbing. He'd come so close to maybe understanding, to maybe finding the others. But he couldn't do it. Fear had stopped him again. He made his way back to his car and drove to Reno. He checked into a motel and called Detective Sarah Brennan. She was retired, but he still had her number from years ago. She answered on the third ring. Detective Brennan, this is Daniel Cooper. I need to talk to you. They met at a coffee shop the next day. Daniel looked terrible, and Brennan immediately recognized the signs of serious illness. But his eyes were bright with urgency. He told her about what he'd seen in the desert. The shimmer. The vibration. Everything. Brennan listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you believe me?" Daniel asked. "I believe you experienced something," Brennan said carefully. "Whether it was real or a hallucination brought on by your illness, I can't say." "It was real," Daniel insisted. "I know the difference." Brennan sighed. "Daniel, I've spent years on this case. I've explored every possibility. And the truth is, I don't know what happened. I don't think I ever will." "Will you come with me?" Daniel asked. "Back to that spot. Maybe if we both see it." Brennan wanted to say no. She was 71 years old, retired, and had long ago accepted that some cases don't get solved. But looking at Daniel, seeing how desperate he was, she couldn't refuse. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." The next day, they drove out to Highway 50 together. Daniel showed her approximately where he'd been, where he'd seen the shimmer. They waited for hours, sitting in the desert, watching. Nothing happened. The sun moved across the sky normally. The desert was quiet. No vibrations. No shimmers. Just sand and rock and endless blue sky. As evening approached, Brennan suggested they head back. Daniel agreed reluctantly. On the drive back to Reno, he was quiet. Finally, he said, "I know what you're thinking. That I imagined it. That the cancer has spread to my brain." "I'm thinking," Brennan said, "that you've carried this burden for a very long time. And maybe your mind is trying to give you closure by creating something that explains it." Daniel shook his head. "I know what I saw yesterday. Just like I knew what I saw 24 years ago. But I also know I can't prove it. I can't prove any of it." They reached Reno as the sun was setting. Brennan dropped Daniel at his motel. Before he got out of the car, she said, "Daniel, for what it's worth, I believe you believe it. And I've seen enough strange things in my career to know that we don't have all the answers. Maybe what you saw was real. Maybe there are things in that desert we don't understand." Daniel nodded. "Thank you for coming with me. I know it probably seemed like a waste of time." "It wasn't," Brennan said. And she meant it. That was the last time they spoke. Daniel drove back to Oregon and died 6 months later, in November 2011. He was alone when he passed, in a hospice facility. He'd asked to be cremated, and his ashes scattered in the Oregon wilderness. He left behind a handwritten journal, found among his belongings after his death. The journal contained his detailed account of everything that had happened in 1987, along with his thoughts and theories accumulated over 24 years. He'd also documented his experience in the desert in May 2011. The journal ended with these words, "I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't know if anyone will believe it. But I know the truth. Something happened on Highway 50 on July 15, 1987. Something that took 18 people from this world. Where they went, I cannot say. But they went somewhere. They walked through a door I couldn't see, into a place I cannot imagine. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're still walking, still moving through that wrong light, towards something beyond my understanding. I hope they're at peace. I hope they found something beautiful on the other side. And I hope that someday, someone will find the answers I never could." The journal was given to Sarah Brennan by Daniel's executor. She read it cover to cover, sitting in her study, tears running down her face. This man had carried this weight his entire life. The survivor's guilt, the unanswered questions, the knowledge that he'd never be fully believed. Brennan added the journal to her collection of files on the case. It's still there, in her garage, alongside everything else. She's 85 years old now, in 2025, and the case remains officially unsolved. But there have been other developments over the years. Small things. Strange things. In 2015, the same year Patricia Mitchell died still searching for her daughter and granddaughters, a satellite image of the Nevada desert captured something unusual. In an area about 60 miles south of Highway 50, the image showed what appeared to be a perfectly circular depression in the sand, about 200 feet in diameter. A team from the USGS went to investigate. When they arrived at the location, the depression was gone. The sand showed no signs of disturbance. It was as if whatever had created the depression had simply vanished. or as if the satellite had captured a glitch, an error. But enhanced analysis of the image showed it wasn't a glitch. The depression was real in that moment. And in the center of the depression, if you enhanced the image enough, you could see what looked like footprints. Multiple sets, leading into the center and then stopping. In 2018, a geology student conducting research in the Nevada desert found something strange. She was collecting rock samples when she discovered a piece of cloth buried in the sand. The cloth was remarkably well preserved, considering the harsh desert environment. It was blue denim, the kind used in jeans. When analyzed, the fabric was dated to the 1980s based on the weave and dye patterns. And when DNA testing was performed, the results showed a familial match to the Rodriguez family. David Rodriguez, the young man who had been on his honeymoon, had been wearing jeans. But like the shoe found years earlier, there was nothing else. Just one piece of fabric, alone in the vast desert. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the world felt surreal and strange, something happened that got less attention than it might have otherwise. A family driving across Nevada on Highway 50 took a photo of the sunset. When they reviewed their photos later, they noticed something in one image. In the background, barely visible, there appeared to be a bus on the side of the road. An old-style bus, like those from the 1980s. And standing near the bus, barely more than blurred shapes, were what appeared to be people. The family hadn't seen the bus when they took the photo. It wasn't there when they looked. But it was in the image, clear enough to see but too blurred to make out details. The photo went viral on social media. Skeptics said it was edited, a hoax. Believers said it was proof that the bus and passengers existed in some kind of liminal space, occasionally visible to cameras if not to human eyes. The photo was analyzed by experts. No signs of digital manipulation were found. Whatever was in that photo had been there, in some form, when the image was captured. But that doesn't mean it was a physical bus. It could have been a reflection, an optical illusion, any number of things. Or it could have been exactly what it appeared to be. A ghost bus. A memory burned into the desert. An echo of something that happened long ago. These strange reports continue. Every few years, someone sees something. A shimmer in the air. Lights where no lights should be. Footprints that appear and disappear. The sound of a bus engine where no bus exists. Highway 50 remains the loneliest road in America. People still drive it, though some do so nervously, especially when passing through the area where the bus vanished. Some people report feeling watched. Others feel nothing at all. The families of the victims have mostly passed away now. The younger generation, the children and grandchildren of those who disappeared, carry the story forward. Some of them have made pilgrimages to Nevada, walking the desert, looking for answers their parents and grandparents never found. The case files remain open. Technically, it's still an active investigation, though no one is actively investigating anymore. The physical evidence, what little there is, sits in storage facilities. The footprint casts, the shoe, the fabric, the piece of the bus, fragments of a mystery that may never be solved. So what really happened on Highway 50 on July 15, 1987? After nearly 40 years, we still don't know. The theories remain the same. Natural phenomena, government cover-up, mass hallucination, or something stranger. Something that doesn't fit into our understanding of reality. Maybe there are doorways in this world. Places where the barriers between here and somewhere else grow thin. Maybe the desert, vast and ancient and unknowable, holds secrets we weren't meant to discover. Maybe the sun really did blink that day, and in that moment of darkness, something reached through. Or maybe it was something simpler, something explainable, and we just haven't found the explanation yet. Maybe someday, someone will discover the truth. A researcher will find a crucial piece of evidence. A deathbed confession will be made. Something will finally explain what happened to those 18 people. But until that day comes, if it ever does, the story of the bus that vanished in the desert remains one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. 18 people walked into the desert, and never came back. Only one man survived to tell a story that seems impossible. And on certain days, when the light is strange and the air feels heavy, people driving Highway 50 report seeing things. A figure walking in the distance. A child's laughter carried on the wind. A bus that appears and disappears. Shadows that move wrong. Are these real? Are they the product of overactive imaginations primed by the famous story? Are they tricks of light and heat? Or are they something more? The desert keeps its secrets. It has for millions of years. It will for millions more. But sometimes, late at night, when the desert is dark and the stars are bright, you might see something. A shimmer. A movement. A light where no light should be. And if you do, remember Daniel Cooper's words. Close your eyes. Don't look at it. Turn around and walk away. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And some places, once entered, may not let you leave. The passengers of that bus walked through a door none of us can see. Where it led, we may never know. But somewhere, in some form, in some place beyond our understanding, they may still be walking. Still moving through that wrong light. Still heading towards something we cannot comprehend. And the sun? It keeps rising and setting over the Nevada desert, day after day, year after year. Constant. Reliable. Never blinking. Or does it? If you're ever on Highway 50, driving through that lonely stretch of desert, pay attention. Watch the light. Feel the air. And if, for just a moment, the sun seems to flicker, if the light seems wrong, if you feel a vibration deep in your chest, remember this story. Remember the 18 people who vanished. Remember Daniel Cooper, who spent his life haunted by what he saw. Remember that there are things in this world we don't understand. Things that don't follow the rules we think are absolute. And whatever you do, don't stop the bus. Don't get out. Don't walk into the desert. Keep driving. Keep moving. Don't look back. Because out there in the Nevada desert, in the emptiness between towns, on the loneliest road in America, something waits. Something that took 18 people and left no trace. Something that might still be there, watching, waiting for the next time the sun blinks. This is the story of the bus that vanished in the desert. A mystery without answers. A tragedy without closure. A reminder that for all our knowledge and technology and certainty, we still don't know everything about this world we live in. And maybe, just maybe, we're better off not knowing. Some truths are too strange to accept. Some doors are better left unopened. Some roads are lonely for a reason. Drive safely on Highway 50. And if you see a bus stopped on the side of the road, with people looking up at nothing, with the lights seeming wrong and the air vibrating, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just keep driving.